Reporting Brief 1 of 4. Category 1.0. Neurological disorders and influenza A, B, C, D, H1 to 18, and N1 to 11. The neurological implications of influenza is mild to varying severity. There is an estimation of potentially many more than the 130 subtypes of Paramyxoviridae viruses. In molecular biology, the hemagglutinin, HA, are receptors of viruses catalogued in the Paramyxoviridae family. Hemagglutinin is responsible for the glycoproteins that such viruses produce to attaching to red blood cell membranes. Neuraminidase, Na, is an enzyme commonly present in microbiology as a facilitator to vectors of infection. The contagious vector and reassortment is due to the recombination effect of two or more different subtypes of influenza that exchange genetic coding transferred by infecting the same host body. Thus the categories, as example, are H1N1 or H3N2 designations. Influenza is categorized into A, B, C, D, and subtypes H1 to 18 and N1 to 11. And further broken down into clades and subclades that differentiate the genetic markers of the type of virus in transit within the body of the specimen. The autoimmune viral transmission occurs as a result of prolonged exposure leading to immune deficiency and what is commonly of impact to neurodegenerative disorder. Understanding the biophysics and chemistry occurring within the host body is imperative to graduating a mastery of contemplating the bigger picture. The unicellular prokaryotic cell, that is, a cell without a nucleus, compared to the eukaryotic cell, that is, a cell with a nucleus, are cellular differences that are significant to cellular intelligence to that of constituent parts of the holism of the elementary host specimen. What I mean to convey here is that the neural transmission of the sensory grid is such that the biotic body is involved as a multicellular elementary unit. A singular frame that is complex organically, and the neural transmitters exclusive to the biotic organism. Embryonic stem cells are cells that have the potential to developing into other cells. The stem cell derivative is a repair system for the body. The cellular regeneration is therefore reliant upon immune efficiency for healthy maturity and development. As a foundation of health and well-being, stem cells are proactively involved throughout the life cycle and promote longevity. It is also important to bringing attention to the parasitic parazoa that is unicellular, or commonly referred to as single-celled, what are relatable to the parasitoid that is insects that incubate eggs in a host eventually killing the host over duration of exposure. Combined with the aforementioned, it is significant to determining such infectious contagion as influenza to being a viral insidious eukaryotic to prokaryotic sink with threat of corroding and corrupting the elementary of the host specimen. It is especially significant of a memory compromisation. Therefore an artificial symptom to causation, that is, bionic inorganic weaponization, is clearly derived from infesting the host and attempts to multiplying an imposed apothecary, such is exposed to higher chance of genetic variants of recombinating as hybrid viruses. With adequate consideration of the calculus of the biomass percentage ratio of the world, such is comparable to the biomass percentage ratio of parasitic prokaryotic cells in all the host bodies, specifically, multicellular organisms, primarily vertebrates that share a common ancestry, as a eukaryotic multicellular organisms. A question then presents, is life an incubation of cellular significance and filtrations, and what actually promotes the advent of death? It is without a doubt of the nuclear weaponization of plutonium significant to the Manhattan Trinity Project, and so it is without doubt of the escalation to nuclear biology and nuclear families to really meaning a literal hybridization of flesh, blood, bones, neurology, memory, and senses by unscrupulous perverts bent to killing everybody insidiously as dominionification extended as appendages of former cells hybridized as bionic mechanized filtrations. There has been biotechnology used to uploading embedded memory upon cells that is simply evident as a cellular intelligence molecularization of brain memory upon derivatives of nanoparticulates, exposed as cyborg imprisonment and desecration of the biological specimen's life, indicative to signifying a hive mind, neurotoxicity filtration to automaton catatonia against the host's brain, and infested throughout the body, secreted upon other biotic bodies and ultimately repeated as a severe insidious soft-kill methodical regime, and a contempt against the biological life promoting a handicapped derivative, and harnessed as an infatuation adhering to a behavioral insanity, whilst possessive extremes induced as a delirious adjunctive catalyst. The potentiality for unscrupulous mutilation neurally and sensually is therefore a high probability, as modes of toxic neurodegenerative parasitic disease. It is important to clarify of how prolific influenza has become amongst vertebrates. As reference of corroborative factors. Bovine flu affecting cows, also referred to as mad cow disease. Avian flu affecting birds. Swine flu affecting pigs. Middle East respiratory syndrome affecting camelids or camels. Canine flu affecting dogs. Cat flu affecting cats. Cercopithecina flu affecting primates, also referred to as monkeypox. With all of the above strains of flu affecting humans. In serology, what is the study of body fluids and serums of proteins in blood factors that presently are associated with antibodies that indicate infection types. It is important to note the various symptoms that result of flu causation and consequential symptoms. Influenza viruses affect many different mammals such as horses, cats, dogs, birds, primates, swine, and humans. It is contagious and spreads rapidly among susceptible vertebrates. Many influenza viruses infect gallons-re or fowl, that is, birds. Rabies, leptospirosis, syphilis, herpes, tuberculosis, hantavirus, and meningitis are several symptomatic neurological diseases affecting the respiratory, skeletal, blood, organs, and nervous system of the mammalian host. Rabies is commonly transmitted via secretion of saliva, and a common association to hydrogenic lasing of the biological specimen, but can also be transmissible via tainted blood factors. Therefore evidently such secretions promote a vicious cycle of repetitions and soft-kill methods of deliberate psychological warfare automated as grievous bodily harm via blood plasma transmission and DNA filtrations, resulting in intravenous vectors of contagion especially via fleas, mites, flies, mosquitoes, and bed bugs, that comprising the Animalia of the insector kingdom. Culicidae, that is the mosquitoes Animalia family, are a common subtropic organism associated with spreading diseases such as malaria and other plagues. Rabies is immediately relevant to neurological exposure that causes neural disorders such as psychosis, schizophrenia, multiple sclerosis, early onset dementia, disordered thoughts, perturbance, anxiety, and stress as sensory distilling primarily, and thus a desensitized algorithmic morbid parasitic symptomatic causation, and subtle to hard modes of compromisation especially of prolonged exposure of the impressionable mammalian host unaware of the causations of such efflux. The brain is of particular susceptibility to the nervous system being imposed against. The symptoms are antagonistic deterioration over duration and of high probability of the development of cognitive disorders that if left untreated results in slow cognitive and bodily deterioration, ultimately resulting in death of the host. Yet the symptoms focused against instead of the actual causations is commonplace of the socio-economic societal machine installed presently as medical practitioner that the majority of humans are involved with, that by proxy implicates the entire medical personnel to reacting to problems distilled via such viral endemics, epidemics and pandemics and treating symptoms rather than focusing against the actual causation of initial infestation. Text file, subcategory 1.2. Feedback lobes and neural frontal cortex substitution. The synapses of neural pathways of the brain is complex. There are neurotransmitters throughout the entire body that can, and have been referred to as a sensory grid, specific to sensors of the synaptic transmission. Thus an image of the specimen can be fundamentally retrofit with appliance of artificial inorganics, such as a nervous system photoscopic analyses, affecting the visional areas of the brain, eyesight, and hearing, similar to electroencephalogram or EEG, and ultrasound or X-ray mapping. What I mean to convey here is, of an insidious weaponization of technology associated directly with existing technology such as X-ray and ultrasound mechanisms resulting as a biohacking derivative, with particular and specific emphasis of chemical saturation, hemoglobin of blood factors, and hydrogel compounds as components of composite. A bionic manifold transmitted via nanoparticulates with the intention of subliminal transmission, especially induced over prolonged duration exposed as a conversion, a graphing feedback loops to the transmitting source, that would be fundamentally conceivable, especially as a image mapping interfered upon the frontal cortex of the brain and the eyeballs due to the immediate connectivity to the optic nerve. Hence a coalescence of bionics as external imposure is calculable of the neural substitution via sophisticated biotechnical apparatus with emphasis upon the dream state, due to the extra vulnerability to programming. The awareness states of the brain and senses have been calculated and measured electronically and categorically graded and labeled as delta, sleeping and dreaming; theta, drowsiness; alpha, reflective and restful; beta, busy and active; gamma, problem-solving and concentration. Hence a retraction upon the brainstem would be the focal point of biomarkers due to the spectral concentration of inducement during wakeful beta and gamma. As a psychotic imposure, the fundamental conception of an entity is, as example, many individuals performing synchronized tasks intent of achieving specific goals of pre-planned contingency facilitated as blueprints of spectral coalescence, primarily for psychological mass formation repurposed as a superorganism manifold mandated as an insidious doctrination against living and dead organisms. The procedure of torment is clearly a trajectory purely based as a harmonic implementation due to the conductive means, albeit a combined biotechnical filtration of actual biology, what would be a nanofiber and hydrogel, conducted as a processing abrasive precursor and as modes of infestation. Text file, subcategory 1.3. Neuroimagery and bioserver harmonic conductivity. The frontal cortex and optic nerve infiltrated as modes of bionic mechanization harboring a transit of nanoparticulates and fiber is cause for immediate concern. The residue of conductive inorganic pathogenic nodes and generic formation is easily conceptualized of the potential methods used to ascertaining a compliance, conformism, and even willing consortment by external appendages resulting as bioserver duplication. Specific to cellular embedment of uploaded memory conversion, and hence, transmission, is simple to estimating the trajectory to a mainframe of elementary to constituents resulting as a hive-minded assortment of frames of types, groups, subgroups, categories and hence hierarchy. Combined of deliberate molecular diffusion, it is not difficult to fathom the vast consequences of biohackers implementing a bionic facilitated contagion as recombinated abrasions against the host bodies. The risks of paramilitary parameters facilitating such biohacking means are high and thus more of a probability than potential. As pre-select contingency of spectrally lasing the holism of such contrived superorganism, the causation of abrasion and infraction against all the host bodies simultaneously, exaggerated as a sorting process, is also a high probability with host bodies filtrated as botnets and filtrated as automated catalysts combined of echelons of subcategories of a computed mainframes. Therefore it is not difficult to fathom of the extension and appendage mired against the holism of the world, and printing performed as prerequisite to integration to what convened as an entity of many individuals, and hierarchical manifolds derived as a complexity of networks. Text file, subcategory 1.4. Efflux, efficacy induction and indoctrination. The conduction of derivatives to cellular biology, such as antibiotics, heavy metals, organic and inorganic pollutants, plant-produced compounds, quorum sensing signals, bacterial metabolites and neurotransmitters, is deducible as an efflux molecularly upon the macrocosm. What is simple to concluding that artificial and inorganic plagiarism is inducible to the neurotransmission from the transit of chemical alchemy and apothecary, as biotic beings are sensitive, therefore an efficacy of induction and indoctrination from external sources is discernible, especially instigated from unscrupulous, nefarious and psychopathically insane cohorts. The initial vectors of porous environments and therefore of deliberate psychological mass formation embellished as a synthesis of synthetic filtration and algorithmic manifolds is not difficult to calculating as vectors of psychological harm and grievous bodily harm, plagiarized bodily natural processes of entanglement with inorganic hydro and nanogel specific but not limited to hydrogenic electrolytes as a semi to full conductivity. Text file, subcategory 1.5. Neural acclimation and habitualization. The implications of a consequence of applied acoustic radio frequency would be an emphasis of a sensory distilling, especially of a continuous barrage of ghosting the sense of hearing and visual cortex of the brain as spectrums of neural sensory inducement of the victimized hosts, in this case, eukaryotic multicellular organisms, via modes of bionic facilitated infestation. To studying such phenomena of psychic abilities entangled of paranormal activity, the clear emphasis of a bionic mechanistic automation is accentuated of a harboring a molecular diffusion upon the victimized body of the biotic organism, particularly of a neurodegenerative viral infection, significant to bacteriophage and other viral vectors. Thus the acclimation of a processing is evident of nefarious implementation of automated memory synthesized via an initial thought-form sensory imposure. A manifold of reliance built up over a duration of prolonged exposure that is simply evident of a remote viewing threshold and hence a psychological tormenting of the brain and the senses. A abrasive synthetic memory combined of aplasmic prosthetics and disembodied thoughts filtrated as clandestine psychogenic mass formation as a neutral convergence of a positive and negative filtering as a sorting process against the host body. Habitual command and persecutory harmonic interfacing is simply evident as the initiation of imposed trajectory, a distilling of domination subtly to severity of malevolent semi to full spectrum conduction. The gradual impact impressioned as neural nodes emitted as emanations of megalomanic hostility extended as remote to local appendage, covertly as a subtle conversion, and overtly upon exposure of such malevolence, escalated via molecular compositions and hence a pre-select precognitive ignition against memory, and further emphasized of narcissistic behavioral obscenity, specific to demographical constraints of the population, is simply evident of the emphasis of uneducated, myopic, inept, handicapped and retarded individuals as direct consequence of policy infraction and retraction of both political and socio-economical constraints and pressures agitating such malevolence as discord and defunct authority of the biotic hosts as bionic replacements, and thus immediately evident as a paramilitary animated filtration of macroviruses and hence the culprits in our midst. Text file, subcategory 1.6. Folia Dukes and neurotransmission. The miming of senses intent of rerouting and subroutine distilling via artificial sensors is a primary instillment performed as a malevolent cathodic, that is, like how a battery functions, is transmitted as emulated anodes upon a brain and or brains and synapses, and recorded via electroencephalogram or EEG, and retransmitted to mechanical instruments, and habitualized as synthetic and prosthetic devices. Such mechanisms from a far distance is achievable, however, of a subliminal posture, especially evident of murderous marauding and contempt against the victimized host specimen and or specimens. So then, a folia dukes, that is, delusion of two or more, neurotransmission filtrated as a prosthetic neuroimagery entangled as a quantum drive virtually committed and emulated as a cloned derivative as a neurogenic to psychogenic posture, that would be fiber optically performed as a displacement and a sacrilegious electrode formula both electrically and sensitizationally built up, as a spectral spectre and a evident hybridization. The impressionable particularly susceptible to a cognitive dissonance, and a repugnant, fear and belief dissonance. The initiation of such imposure would have to be a gestation and a handicapped prominence specific to myopic and inept dysfunction and deficiency of a careless and psychotic imposure committed as emissions of murderous malevolence against the host. Therefore the acclimatization of a technocratic imposure of tracing brains neurally of botnet insidious filtering debauchery is exposed of the sycophants performing ludicrous megalomaniac severity against the intelligence of biotic life forms, although, subliminally as a generic biowarfare, with specific emphasis of botnet enhancement spectrally transmitted as a biophysics, chemical energy, and chemical bioweaponism. The induced contingency of neural and sensory distilling brains as catalysts of neurodegenerative pestilence is clearly emphasized as bioweapon warfare specific but not limited to a molecular decomposition, molecular diffusion, and a molecular biology, bionically animated, and molecularly depleted over duration of precursory distilling of corrosive corruption. The bioarcing derivatives filtrated as singularities and dualities of cloning the DNA of blood, and filtrating an RNA transmission artificially, is significant exposure of the genetic blood factors integrated upon mainframes of sophisticated technology, with emulated geo and biomaps with holographic contingency, of a murderous albeit a tragic victimization, of hybridized catatonic zombie cells both eukaryotically and prokaryotically synchronized as bioserver derivatives that is simply evident of the psychopathic mania filtrated as a nonsense nuisance of handicapped emulation of spectral clones threatened against any organism that exhibits self-sustained intelligence of critical thinking. It is imperative to noting that intelligence is immeasurable, and the depraved insanity is clearly the primary residual impact as excuse to committing murderous marauding against everything, what is direct and immediately evident of the belligerence of cannibals and the pestilence of viral perversion. That privileged duped vicious fools have become victims of their own demise by adhering to such sycophants psychotically animated as singularities amongst the entire population as a decentralized paramilitary force, posing as a nation, whilst also catatonically imposed against dupe to being chemically altered, genetically modified and psychically versed as singular dualities impressioned as power over others and dominions. Category 2.0 Thought form and psychic parapsychology and precognition.